important method of formative assessment is homework. In this lesson, we're going to think about how we can use homework effectively to gain information about our students' learning. Now, I'm basing a lot of this on an article in ASCD's journal, Educational Leadership, from their March 2014 issue. It's the article Student-Owned Homework. I realize that my focus here is on the type of homework we often give, which involves review and practice of material covered in class. And I'm not looking here at more project-oriented homework, things like where they have research papers to work on or class projects. And I'm not looking at the type of homework that you usually have in literature classes, where the students read a chapter for homework to prepare to discuss it the next day, although I'll consider that a bit. And again, I'm not looking here about just studying for tests as homework. Instead, I'm thinking about these types of examples of homework. Let's say you have a math lesson and you give the students 20 problems for homework. Or you have a grammar lesson, they have a worksheet with sentences to diagram. Or there's a history lesson and their homework is to read the next section of the textbook and answer the questions at the end of the section. So how can we use this type of homework as formative assessment? Now, we need to look at homework and many other types of work in class the same way as we look at a child learning to walk. I mean, we don't fuss at the child when he tries and falls. We don't say, well, I guess you're just not going to be a walker. Instead, we encourage him. We cheer his first steps. When he falls, we pick him up, let him try again and again. Same thing when he learns to feed himself, to dress himself, and so on. We recognize our child has a long way to go and his efforts aren't perfect, but we allow him to try, and he learns through the effort. We should view homework the same way. It's where students try out things they've learned in class and see if they've really mastered them. They may very well fail the first time they do something. I mean, you've just taught them about finding the simple subject and simple predicate in a sentence, and you give them some homework where they have to do that. Some students will get it the first time. Others still won't know how to do it. So should you give them a low grade on their homework? A grade that'll be averaged into their final grade for the year? I mean, let's set aside the problem of students who don't do their homework. That's a different issue. But you've just introduced a concept, you give them homework, they don't do it well, and they get a low grade that's going to be averaged. Is that how you deal with it? Well, go back to the example of raising children. When your child first successfully rides a bike, you say, well, okay, that's good, but what about all the times you tried and fell? You might be riding your bike okay now, but overall, when I just average together all your efforts, you're just not much of a bike rider. I mean, that's absurd. But in essence, that's what we do when we just grade and average all their homework together. Their first attempts get calculated the same as their later mastery. Now, this gets into grading philosophy and mastery learning, and we don't have time here to deal with that. But my point here is that we need to start looking at homework as these types of attempts by students to start learning the material, look at it in a formative sense, and not use homework as evidence that they have or have not learned it in a summative sense. Now, the type of homework we assign. What's going to be effective? Now, much of what we traditionally do is focused just on working. Students are given an assignment, usually low-level rote tasks, to complete overnight or risk punishment. They've got 20 math problems which all deal with the same lesson concept, like multiplying two-digit numbers. They have 25 sentences for them to underline the simple subject once and the simple predicate twice. They have 4 pages of their science book to read with 10 simple comprehension questions to answer. The thing is, these types of assignments really don't give you effective information about whether the students are learning the material. Often they just become busy work which takes labor, but which doesn't really accomplish a lot. I mean, think about it. If a student can't do 1 or 2 multiplication problems, he certainly can't do 20. If he can find the subject and predicate in 3 sentences, he can find it in 20. And what intellectual firepower does it take to look at simple rote questions at the end of a chapter and scan the text to find the answer? That doesn't tell you whether he understands the text. It just tells you he's able to scan the text and find the answers. If you're going to use homework as a means of formative assessment, then your focus must shift to demonstrating complex and sophisticated learning. So rote practice is out. Task complexity is in. Students don't just copy spelling words, they use them to write short essays. Instead of giving 20 math problems, give 3, but also have the students write out the steps they took to solve them in sentence form. I have them write out, I multiplied the 6 and the 3 in the 1's place and got 18. I put the 8 in the 1's place and the 1 above the 10's place. Then I multiplied, and so on. That's going to help cement the process in their minds, and it'll also show you whether or not they really understand the process. Instead of underlining the subject and predicate in 20 random sentences, give them a 4-sentence paragraph and have them do it. Then have them rewrite the paragraph and change the subjects and predicates to make a different story. So if a sentence says Billy hit the ball, it becomes Jane caught the ball. For the science reading, have them read the section that you assign to them, but then have them write 3 sentences summarizing the section, or have them draw a picture that illustrates it. See, these are things that are going to get more into whether they can think and understand the material, and helps you to see if they understand the material. Now the thing is, this is new for most students. A lot of times they've been comfortable with just rote homework tasks, and they may not know how to tackle higher level tasks. You give them a synthesis level task that requires thought and analysis, and they may ask, well, where do I find the answer? And you may have parents with concerns. How am I supposed to help my child? The answers aren't in the book. You need to be sure you're communicating with parents and students ahead of time, letting them know that you're looking at homework a bit differently. And it means you might have to rethink how you grade homework. If you grade it for accuracy and correctness, you could be penalizing students when they're still in the just learning phase. If you just grade it for completion, you could be encouraging them just to slap anything on the paper and not work at it. If you don't grade it at all, you lose the ability to hold them accountable for doing it. Let's take an example like in this picture. But in this case, let's say for homework you give them just the first 3 problems. And they have to work the problem out and write out the steps they took to solve them, like I mentioned earlier. Then the next day when they come into class, have them set those papers on their desk. You go around and check them and their explanations while they work a few review problems which you put on the board. Maybe not the new concept, but things from previous lessons. And you have a 3-point rubric for their homework. Level 3, completed, accurate, all steps explained. 2, it's completed, all steps explained, but a few errors, or a valid attempt, but they misunderstood. Score of 1, not completed, didn't attempt to explain adequately or at all. And a 0, they didn't attempt. Now, don't count this as a percentage grade, that is, at the end of the quarter you average all their homework grades together, but instead count it as a points grade, where you add up all the points. So that at the end of the quarter, it's like, okay, how many homework assignments did we have? And there's a 3-point scale, and so they could earn so many points. What that does is minimize the impact of a few 1s or 0s instead of averaging them in together. Okay, how about the science class, where they had to read a section of the textbook and write either a 4-sentence summary or draw an illustration. So when they come into class the next day, they put their homework on their desk while they start labeling the parts of a bacteria you have on the board. You check their homework with that same 3-point rubric. 3, complete and accurate summary. 2, mostly correct but some errors, but a valid attempt. 1, lackluster attempt with errors, and 0, did not do. So that you're able to score their homework, but it's done differently and it factors differently than if you just give them a strict grade on every homework assignment. Now the thing is, while you're checking this, while you're going around the room checking it, you're not just issuing these rubric grades for the work. You're also making notes about areas where students are struggling. Maybe you see several students forgetting a step in the multiplication process, so you make a note of that. It seems that students are missing an important element of this section of the science homework. Make a note of that. Then in the lesson, you can be sure and address those areas. You can go back over them and say, okay, let's review this concept. You can also praise the students when they're all getting some part of it right. You might say, I see you all lined up your partial products correctly. Way to go. And you can make note of any individual students who might need special help. You notice that Susie really seems not to have a clue about the multiplication process, so you arrange to sit down with her individually to work on it. Now, what about using homework for practice of a new concept? Let's say you've just taught students how to do these types of calculations and write them in decimal form, and you want them to practice it to make it more automatic. Now, this is a valid type of homework, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here because this really isn't formative assessment, checking to see if they understand and then adjusting your instruction based on it. Instead, you just want them to practice the skill enough so it becomes second nature. All I'll say here is be sure the students are actually doing them right before you have them do a lot of practice. You don't want them practicing the wrong thing 25 times. I'm planning another professional development series on homework, and I'll deal with this type of homework at that time. Then there's the homework you assign to prepare for the next day. Humanities teachers do this regularly. Read these pages and we'll discuss them in class tomorrow. This is related to the flipped classroom concept. Watch a video, and the next day's work is practicing what was in the video. You need to be sure there's some accountability for this, though. I mean, when I was in high school and we were supposed to read something at home to prepare for discussion in class the next day, I almost never read them. I got through high school, didn't read more than a fourth of the books I was supposed to have read because I figured out I could pick up enough from class discussion to get good grades on the tests. So I didn't read the book, I just listened to what was said in class. So there needs to be some type of accountability, but you also want to get a handle on whether the students are understanding their reading. There's two ways to do this. One, you could give a brief quiz, either online in the evening or at the beginning of class the next day. Not an extensive quiz, not one trying to delve into higher levels of understanding. That's what you're going to be going over in class. But this is just something to show you if they read the material or if they watched the assigned video. But you also want to design these quizzes so they'll give you some input about whether or not the students comprehended what they read, so you can see what they might have missed. If you have them watch videos to prepare, there are websites that allow you to embed quizzes in the video itself. Zaption is one of these, Edpuzzle is another. With these, you can insert questions and get student response at selected parts of the video, and you get input before class the next day to inform you about what you might need to go over more. You can see things that the students may have missed. So, these are some ways you can use homework as formative assessment tools. Tools to get more feedback about what your students understand and, more importantly, what they still need help on. If you have questions or comments, please drop me a note.